From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Colombia has a newly elected president. The right-wing candidate Ivan Duque has won a clear victory in the runoff election on Sunday. Duque, a protege of former President Álvaro Uribe, won 54% of the vote, while left-wing candidate and former mayor of Bogotá, Gustavo Petros, got just under 42%.
8 million Colombians really hope for a change after so many years, and it's really sad to see that the youth did not dominate the vote, and to see that the same people as always, the same families as always, are once again in power.
The elections were good. We hope that this new president will do good things for this country.
The National Liberation Army, or ELN, currently in peace talks with the Colombian government in Havana, Cuba, have expressed their hopes that peace talks can continue and even advance with the new government of Ivan Duque, and that the agreements reached in the talks will be respected.
We have just heard about the triumph of the new president of Colombia. We take note that he will govern for all Colombians. That is very important, because ultimately just a fifth of Colombians voted for him. That 8 million Colombians who at the polls said yes to peace, meaning to the talks that are taking place, we hope that they can continue, that they can move forward with the new government, and that the peace agreements that are going to come will be respected.
Now let's go to Bogotá to speak to Richard McCall, an independent journalist specializing in the peace process. Hello, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So Pablo Beltrán, the head of the ELN delegation, says he hopes that the dialogues will continue. What do you think Ivan Duque is going to do about these talks?
Well, the word out at the moment after last night's elections, which brought in Ivan Duque, 51% of the vote, so on. The word out there is that Ivan Duque is going to end these peace dialogues with the ELN, with the National Liberation Army. I mean, the idea that he has is to enforce further conditions upon this guerrilla group, but they're unlikely to adhere to these conditions. The conditions such as they all mobilize to one area to demilitarize and to disarm. And of course, this won't happen. This group is not interested in that. Each front of the ELM is rather autonomous of the other front. So it will be very difficult for them to agree on something like this. So we can expect, I think, the peace talks to be thrown out.
And Duque has said, well, before the election, he said that he will destroy the agreement with the FARC. And then he said he will amend it. And it's been a difficult issue for a lot of candidates and politicians in Colombia. What do you think will happen with the implementation process of the agreement, which is one of the most important parts?
Yes, Ivan Duque in the early days of the elections had said he would shred the peace accord. Of course, the peace accord which was signed in 2016 with the FARC guerrillas and the government of Juan Manuel Santos, bringing to an end more than 50-odd years of conflict. He said he'd shred it, but in recent weeks leading up to the runoff of the elections, which happened on Sunday night, he softened his tone, saying that he wants to revisit and restructure certain parts of it. What he said in his opening speech as president-elect is that he wants the peace accord to address the victims and the victims' rights. I don't think he can possibly tear up the peace accord like he once threatened. What he'll do is he'll starve it. He won't act so fast on it, maybe not pay certain sectors of it, which will have the same effect. It will run it into the ground, but he could then say that he's done everything in his power to keep it alive. But at the same time, it's a very tough and tricky moment for Colombia.
And how do you think the relationship will be between Duque and the FARC that now it's a party and it's currently in the Senate?
This is interesting as well. I mean, Duque has expressed his displeasure with members of the FARC getting 5 mandatory seats in the Congress and 5 mandatory seats in the Senate. Of course, this was part of the peace deal. This was the issue of political participation, which the FARC have always felt they'd never had, sort of formal participation in Colombia's politics. So, I mean, he says that he doesn't like these people being in Congress or in the Senate until they've, been subject to Colombia's justice. But this has already been signed off by Colombia's highest courts. So he'll find it very hard to undo this. He'll find it very hard to turn back the clock on much of this. Yes, he's got the majority in the Senate and in Congress, but there's a very sizable amount of people who did not vote for him, 8 million, of course, who voted for Gustavo Petros, and therefore the road ahead is not going to be all smooth sailing for the newly president, Ivan Duque.
So what are your thoughts on Petro? Gustavo Petro had an overwhelming success in a traditionally conservative country as Colombia. So what does this mean for the left in the country, because Petro has said that he will be the opposition in Congress?
Yes, now Gustavo Petros' 8 million vote haul yesterday evening was unprecedented in Colombia's history. But if you look back over the elections, over the last sort of 15, 20 years, there is a move and you see the left wing growing. I mean, very little by little, the Polo Alternativo Democrático, the Polo Democrático, the obviously Colombia Humana, there is an increase. And this is starting to coincide with people, and of course it's a result of the peace accord with the FARC. People are recognizing voters, younger voters, perhaps who have not lived through the hideous days, the worst days of the Colombian conflict. They no longer associate left-wing with the FARC, the stigma. This stigma, of course, runs deep, and there's a long way to go, but Gustavo Petro has been, pivotal in this change, and it's obviously very good, it's very healthy for Colombia's democracy. Now, Gustavo Petro will go into the Senate, and he will be leading the opposition. He will be the checks and balances for the peace agreement. He was very much in favor of the peace agreement. In fact, he wanted to strengthen sections of it and work further on sections of it, including agrarian reform. So he will be there, holding the government to account on this. And don't rule him out running for the presidency again in 2022. His profile is up. People across the country know him. He's going to be around for a while.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
So we'll keep an eye on that story as well. So let's hear from our correspondent in Bogotá, Natalia Margarita, who has more on this historic election.
Over 19 million Colombians have cast their vote in a historical election process that comes as the first presidential race since a peace deal between the government and the FARC was signed in 2016. The future of this peace process was at the center of this presidential campaign, involving two candidates who represent opposing political projects.
Gustavo Petro has maintained a coherent position regarding the peace accords, defending their full implementation, promoting talks with the National Liberation Army, and asking for a ceasefire. Ivan Duque, on the other hand, follows the lead of his political mentor, Álvaro Uribe, who is even willing to completely undo the agreement.
The nearly 96,000 voting tables across the country closed at 4 p.m. local time. 1 hour later, electoral authorities announced that right-wing Ivan Duque from the political party of former President Álvaro Uribe won over progressive left-leaning candidate Gustavo Petro.
I was surprised by the outcome. We believed in the power of Petro's movement. It was an alternative to the establishment. It stood against the drug trafficking and corruption that have been polluting our system for a very long time.
Despite the final results, this is the first time in Colombia that an independent left-wing presidential candidate made it to a runoff, reaching a historical number of 8 million votes, something that for many citizens expresses the discontent towards traditional politicians, as well as the beginning of a change in the country's political culture.
In the first round, we won 5 million votes, and on Sunday, we got 8 million. We nearly doubled our results in the runoff. We are going to keep working together in this alliance, especially towards peace. Colombia achieved an important agreement, and we won't allow peace to be destroyed.
Now, the future of Colombia's peace process remains uncertain, but what is certain is that the recently elected Ivan Duque will face a broad and diverse coalition that will not give up in defending peace and social justice for the country. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá, Colombia.
Moving to another story, the first video of a migrant detention facility in the United States has been released and is causing outrage. The video was given by Border Patrol guards to visiting journalists who were not allowed to take video or make their own interviews during the tour in McAllen, Texas. Dozens of migrant parents are being split from their children every day. Their children are labeled unaccompanied minors and sent to camps, while their parents are deemed criminals and sent to jail. Between October 2017 and May 2018, at least 2,700 children have been split from their parents. The United Nations Human Rights Chief has described the policy as child abuse.
The thought that any state would seek to deter parents by inflicting such abuse on children is unconscionable. I call on the United States to immediately end the practice of forcible separation of these children, and I encourage the government to at last ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child in order to ensure that the fundamental rights of all children, whatever their administrative status, will be at the center of all domestic laws and policies.
Now to Brazil, where former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva could be one step closer to freedom, according to his supporters. This comes as Brazil's Supreme Court ruled against the coercive practices of the Lava Jato operation and the judge behind it, Sergio Moro. The ruling says Lula was obligated to testify in the case, even though there were no charges against him or evidence of corruption, and the measures applied were disproportionate. For example, sending 500 policemen to Lula's house to force him to testify. Lula will still need the Attorney General's support to apply his request for freedom. We'll now take a short break, but join us again after this video from our multimedia team. For our World Cup update, England has beaten Tunisia 2-1 during their opening match at the Volgograd Arena. Harry Kane took the lead for the English, but was later matched by a shot from Ferjani Sassi after a penalty was called by the referee before the end of the first half. In the last minutes of the game, Harry Kane scored again for England in Group G. In the same group, Belgium has won their match 3-0 against Panama. It took a deep-in volley from Dries Mertens on the right-hand edge of the area just after halftime to break the deadlock. During the first match of the day, Sweden defeated South Korea 1-0 in Group F. Sweden went ahead when Andreas Granqvist put away a penalty in the 65th minute. The video assistant referee, known as the VAR, awarded Sweden with a penalty that led to the winning goal. Japan's coach Akira Nishino shared his concerns over the 6.1 magnitude earthquake which hit Osaka on Monday morning and the impact this may have on the Japanese players before their opening match against Colombia. The Japanese are seeking World Cup revenge at the Mordovia Arena in Saransk on Tuesday after being hammered 4-1 by Colombia and its star James Rodriguez in the group stages of Brazil 2014.
Colombia is very organized. They attack a lot. They bring the ball forward well, and they finish well. So we'd like probably to disrupt the rhythm rather than just be passive to the rhythm. We'd like to make our rhythm, and we'd like to take the initiative from defense to offense, how confident we can be. I think we really have to be focused as a team.
While World Cup celebrations take place in Russia, hundreds of thousands of people are paying visit to the historical sites of the former Soviet Union.
Gesualdo Condori Mamani is one of thousands of Peruvian fans visiting the sites in Moscow. But for him and his family, Red Square has a special significance. Mamani studied in Russia thanks to a scholarship scheme set up under the Soviet Union, after which he went back to contribute in Peru. 20 years later, he's come back for the World Cup and to show his family where he went to school.
I came here to visit Russia, as I lived here to attend university. I have taken advantage, of course, of the chance to come during the World Cup. For me, Russia is like my second home, because all that I have, everything, is thanks to the Soviet Union. I had a scholarship, and this country has given me a lot. Their system gave me more than I ever expected, and I feel it in my heart. It's not something that is easy to describe. For me, being here is very significant because this is not just a trip, a chance to sightsee, an excursion. It's also an experience that we have to see in terms of philosophy, lifestyle and socialism, communism.
Juan Manuel Ortiz, a spectator from Mexico, previously visited Beijing and had a very gratifying experience learning about Mao's leadership and prominent communist history. Here in Russia, he sees his trip for the World Cup as a cultural exchange as well.
From an external point of view, obviously, in part because we are at the World Cup, barriers which enforce stereotypes come down. Latinos love Russians, and Russians are very welcoming to Latinos. It's a pleasure to know them and the people here, who are so kind and open. Nothing like the stereotype you hear about from afar and about the West in general. It's totally different. It's a pleasure to be here in Russia.
In Mexico, the joy of their victory against Germany didn't stop the Mexicans from demanding fair elections while candidates continue their campaigns during the World Cup. Our correspondent Pablo Perez has more.
World Cup fever is no stranger to presidential campaigns. There were screens placed at political rallies for fans to watch the first Mexico game in Russia 2018. Conservative politician Ricardo Anaya, who has promised to tackle corruption, watched the game accompanied by Deputy Mauricio Toledo, who was accused of diverting funds for the Mexico City reconstruction after the earthquake. In a square full of people in Mexico Stadium, Andrés Manuel López Obrador dedicated a message to the national team.
Our congratulations to the national soccer team for the win against Germany.
In the northern state of Sinaloa, one of the places in Mexico most afflicted by the war on drugs, the candidate for the Revolutionary Institutional Party attempted to claim the glory of the victory of the Mexican team, comparing it to his own, despite being third, with over 25 points behind López Obrador.
First, Happy Father's Day. Second, Thank you, Mochis and Ahome. Third, we beat Germany.
For 93 minutes, the country put politics aside to focus on the game, 10,000 kilometers away. Mexico's victory caused widespread joy, but reflection on the nation's hardships were not forgotten.
We don't want goals. We want Mexico to be at peace, with opportunities for everybody. We want to tell the whole people in Mexico not to sell out their vote.
The final score was 1-0, causing multiple trending topics on social media in Mexico. Even the revelation that the roar of fans celebrating the winning goal was detected by the country's seismological system in Mexico City.
Oscar López Rivera, the leader of the independence movement in Puerto Rico, has called on the UN General Assembly to end the colonial status of the island. López Rivera denounced the negative impact of the United States colonialism during his speech at the UN Special Committee on Decolonization. He said domination by the US government has caused pain and suffering in the lives of Puerto Ricans, and due to this, many had to leave their country.
The fact that there are 5 million Puerto Ricans abroad and only 3 million on the island shows how accelerated and intense the migration has been in the last 3 decades.
In Nicaragua, talks continue to achieve a peaceful end to the opposition's violence towards President Daniel Ortega's government. Representatives of the Catholic Church said that the only possible road in Nicaragua is one of reconciliation and peace. They assured that this is vital to promote justice and not revenge. From their point of view, there is no alternative to this dialogue. Cardinal Leopoldo Brenes assured that the Church will continue emphasizing dialogue as a means for resolution. The Sandinista government has also expressed on different occasions their willingness to have an open dialogue with all sectors of society to bring an end to violence. While these efforts for national reconciliation continue in Nicaragua, workers called for a special Congress for peace. Let's hear it from María José Díaz with the story from Managua.
Relative calm dawns in Nicaragua, in moments in which representatives of government and opposition groups met the past Saturday to address security concerns, election matters, and potential reforms. Today, the group continued talks at 10 in the morning local time. The negotiations are developing within the commissions. On the other side, the National Workers' Front announced a unique agreement to take measures in defense of the right to live in peace, for which they will organize on Wednesday, June 20th, a congress of all the affiliated workers in the sector. Meanwhile, roadblocks continue in the country, which have caused deaths and menace a population that ultimately wants to live in peace.
María José Díaz from Managua. And in Patagonia, Argentina, the Mapuche leader Facundo Jones Walla has now taken his hunger strike to the point of refusing liquids after 18 days. He first began his protest after Judge Gustavo Villanueva denied the Mapuche leader the possibility to have an ancestral Wiño ceremony inside the prison. Now, Lonco Facundo Jones awaits the resolution of his extradition to Chile, which rests in the hands of the Supreme Court. Argentina's stock market has plunged by 6.5% today, pulled by sharp declines in prices for energy and bank shares. This comes after a number of high-level government shifts on Saturday, including replacements for both the energy and production ministers. The Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions is organizing its 61st annual international convention in Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago. The group, established in 1972, serves as the apex trade and development organization for financial and non-financial cooperatives in the Caribbean. Antigua and Barbuda, Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago are among the 18 members from the region. Speaking at the opening ceremony, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, said the union has the power to change the future of credit services in the area.
While the mandate of the Cooperative Development Division includes promoting cooperatives as viable business enterprises and creating an enabling environment to contribute towards the socio-economic development of its members, It is clear that the credit union movement has substantially outgrown its space and has now established itself as a worthy contender among the most highly regarded and respected families of financial institutions worldwide.
The Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea have agreed to form unified teams at specific events during the upcoming Asian Games scheduled for August in Indonesia. The agreement came after officials from the two sides held talks to improve inter-Korean sports cooperation. Seoul and Pyongyang also agreed to let their athletes march together during the opening and closing ceremonies of the Asian Games. This according to the South Korea's Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism. In other news, U.S. President Donald Trump wants to colonize space with what he called a space force.
When it comes to defending America, it is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space. So important. Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a space force as the sixth branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement. We are going to have the Air Force and we are going to have the Space Force.
The remains of fascist dictator Francisco Franco could soon be removed from the country's state-funded mausoleum. This is under a plan by Spain's new socialist government to transform the monument into a place to remember the civil war rather than glorify the dictatorship. This would be the latest of a raft of high-profile measures launched by Spain's new Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, to cement his power and seat left-wing voters from Podemos ahead of a general election due by mid-2020. And before we end today's show, a reminder that you can catch our special World Cup program with Diego Maradona, De la Mano del 10. The World Cup, according to Maradona, will air only on Telesur every night at these times, daily during the World Cup in Russia, so be sure to tune in. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But this and other stories, as you know, you can find on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And be sure to join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.